Okay, so there's one question here that we'll start with. And please say who you are and where you're from.
I'm Jill Healy from Child Hope UK. We also work in Ethiopia, Uganda and Nepal. And one of the things that we found, our partners implement very, very similar projects to the things that have been addressed in the research. And one of the things that we find that as girls become more empowered through the girls' clubs and they're given more opportunities to speak and learn about the issues that they're facing and how to access change for themselves, that they become more demanding. And as a result of that, what we find is that the child protection and child safeguarding systems are not adequate to deal with the issues that they're raising. I just wondered if that was a similar finding from the research, and if you have any interventions that you applied as a result of finding that when you were going through the process of the research yourselves.
Thank you. I'll take a question. There was a question down here. Okay, there's a question over here first in the red, and then over here.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I'm from Plan, and I'm the editor of the State of the World's Girls Report, and we've just done some research in four-country study, which really does agree with this whole business of communications messages. Girls wanted more information. We asked them what their solutions would be, more information, more openness. But one of the big issues that also came up was the thing about they want their parents to be more educated. And I think that is I would agree with the previous speaker, one of the problems with empowering girls is it can make them more vulnerable. And they all said, we want supportive parents. We need our parents to understand the issues as well. And I think that is a big challenge. And I just wanted to know how that can be confronted, because I think taking girls out of the system, if you like, is not quite good enough, I think. And I think that the issue of reaching the families is something that we really need to grapple with. So I'm hoping that somebody's got some good ideas.
Over here.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Helen Suwana, Children of Congo. I wanted to ask a question for Dr. Zaza. How social expectation, how faith group, churches, and religion keep, how can I say, we find it difficult to empower girls with coming across with the churches and teaching and how do you say it? We find it very challenging to empower girls when they have a Christian belief, religious belief, very strong belief in a community. So we find it. How do you deal with it? How do you break the cycle? Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions over here? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Jelke Boesten from King's College London. Two quick points. It seemed to me that in the case study presentations, several of you mentioned the importance of boys, or you mentioned in the same sentence even, empowering girls and boys. And so I'm wondering about your experiences within these case studies in your work with girls, in how far you managed to involve boys in that same work, and what kind of effect did that have on the project. I guess that education systems are also very important in that sustainability issue, and in working with both girls and boys without taking out girls from the community context. So I was it would be interested in your experiences with schools and working with schools. My second point was about mediation. I really enjoyed your presentation, Zaza, and I'm really impressed with the work that you're doing. And maybe especially because I would also have my reservations around mediation in the first place. But considering that legal systems have been so unable to intervene, and if they intervene, it's often too late. So legal systems have not proven to be effective at all in issues around gender-based violence in general, in whatever community. So my question would be, is the issue of mediation, yes or no, not strongly tied to who does the mediating? and how well trained in relation to gender issues, gender equality, and human rights that facilitator might be.
Okay. I'm just going to use one question online from Maurice Bluem. He's the Executive Vice President of the Church World Service. He wants to ask the panel, while empowering and challenging harmful gender norms, what are the hopes and fears in relation to the global goals? And also the same question we've just had, could the panel react to Diana Nami's statement about the dangers of mediation? We've got 5 questions there. I'll take another round after. Oh, okay. I'll take 1/6 from somebody right at the back, and then we'll take a second round once we've answered these.
My name is Kona Sebure from Advocacy for Mental Health and Human Rights. I am interested.
Can you speak up a bit because we're not catching you?
I want to ask, how does religious perception, culture, and gender norms affect girls and women with mental health problems in the communities you've worked?
Thank you. Okay. Now, not everyone on the panel can answer all the questions, so I'm going to ask for some volunteers. The first one is about child protection systems not being adequate to deal with the problems. I think some of our country partners could perhaps respond to that. So I'm looking at them.
The first question?
Yes, the first question on child protection systems, that the girls get more demanding, but actually the systems aren't there to respond.
Yes, in Uganda, actually, we find that that's a major problem, that the system is not really ready to respond to the demands of these girls. For instance, when girls experience any abuse and they report to the police, they're still considered minors. They're told to bring their parents, and the parents also, they are not yet well informed and aware of some of these things. So the girls actually reported a lot of problems, and they did recommend that there should be programs for their parents and other community members to understand their situation. In one of the projects we had in Uganda, they were involving parents. Parents were invited to the schools and given some sensitization, but also through community dialogues. But I think, yes, it's still a challenge, and it would need to be addressed to meet the demands of the empowered girls. Otherwise, they get isolated.
Okay. I'm going to actually ask Zaza to respond to a couple of questions there. There were some addressed directly to you, but you may want to comment on one or two of the others.
Okay. All right. So thank you for the questions. So I'll talk about them in the order that I've written them, which may not be the same as they were raised. But in terms of faith groups, my background is that I have experienced the polarization of different faith groups. So my mother is strict Baptist, and my mother's line is her heritage is strict Baptist, and my father's is Muslim. So I am known to be a scholar in Islam, and I try my best with the Bible. So in that context, going into faith communities and talking to them about the pull, there's that tension between what the Bible says, what the Quran says, what the Torah says, other scriptures say about the role of women and girls within that community. And then there's, as you may recall that slide, there's what culture says, and then there's what the law says. So if you were to go into a faith community and say, well, look, there's supposed to be gender equality here, you've only to look at the Anglican Church that just recently has had for women bishops approved. And it's really about, for my part, my approach is not to criminalize and make people feel that they should be sat on the naughty step for not having yet got to a place where gender equality is accepted within that faith community. And it's really about using the scriptures, so doing something called scriptural reasoning. So we have small groups where we look at scriptures and debate them in a very authentic and respectful way to look at exactly where has this come from. And I would say to you that 9.9 times out of 10, it will be influenced by culture rather than the scripture per se, because it's about interpretation of the scripture. So my advice to the question that you raised, thank you very much, from the Congo, is really to go into faith groups, faith communities, having full respect and appreciation for their belief, but to challenge them in a respectful way of dialogue and debate about their practices. Yeah, because nothing will change if you make somebody feel humiliated by saying to them, this is what the law says, you know, look, the rest of the world has moved on, you're still here. Nothing will change that way. It's about encouraging them, and one of the things that I wanted to share with you today was to convince men and women of the win-win option. Yeah, so whether you're talking to parents, so now going on to talking about parents, and involvement of parents, we run monthly coffee mornings for parents. They're mostly attended by women currently, but we do have occasional brave men who come in as well. And we talk about very much so that we will set the topic. The topic could be something like bullying. So it's an opportunity for mothers in the main and a few fathers to talk about issues that are almost non-denominational. So there are issues that affect many parents, like bullying, but that you can get the different perspectives. So in that way, friendships are built up, that first of all, security, it's a safe place to talk about things in a confidential space, and the opportunity to bounce ideas off each other, to realize that you're not alone. Whether you're white English or you're black African, bullying is a concern. Bullying of your child is a concern. So it's crossing over those boundaries and sharing good practice and not feeling alone. So now moving on to the mediation question. Why is it that we as a country and generally in the world support the idea of using hostage negotiation? So we accept that in a hostage situation, that rather than just giving money, generally we've all accepted that just giving money to the perpetrator is not the answer. And we promote the idea of negotiation by skilled people who are trained in that art, I would say, rather than a science. The skills that I use and my colleagues use are exactly those. The differences, where we're very fortuitous, is that to date, the hostage isn't actually there. Yeah? So we have the opportunity of hoping to save a life where the girl is actually, or in one instance, the boy, is not actually in that physical place. But our objective is to convince them to do no harm. And we do that in exactly the same way of understanding, seeking to understand, not going in there saying, look, you're wrong, you've taken this person hostage, you're a criminal, how can you live with yourself? It's very much, why do you feel this way? Listening to them. I went through some detail in the slide with the acronym LEARN. It's very much an opportunity to learn. Any hostage negotiator will tell you that if you think, right, I've got the recipe, I can sit back, I'll go through my checklist, that's the first person that's going to die. Yeah. So in terms of those who have the criticism of mediation, again, in the true spirit of a mediator, I totally understand where you're coming from. I do understand it. And my question on a daily basis is, what other way is there? So I am mediating. What other way is there? I'm very fortunate that to date, 23 girls are able to demonstrate and to give testimony that they believe, not I'm saying that, they believe that their lives have been saved. Some of those girls, but only a third of those girls, have been accepted back into the family fold, and it's not a one-night situation or a one-day situation like I do in commercial mediation, where it's time set and you get paid for it. All these cases are done on a pro bono basis. There is no way that you can send an invoice to a family in that situation. Yeah, so just finishing up now, it's very much the law isn't enough of a protective factor. So for those of you who may not be aware, I am a lawyer. I am a medical doctor as well, so I wear different scarves, not hats, but scarves, to come at this. And so it's, the law isn't working early enough to save the life. Often it's reactive. And often in protective orders, for instance, it breaks the family. And most, if not all, of the clients that we work with say, I love my parents. I really don't want something awful to happen to them. You will get occasionally in any setting, not a shame setting necessarily, but if you just walk down the road to a secondary school, there'll be people who say, my parents don't understand me. And they're not Muslim, they're not from ethnic minorities, they're white English, and they're angry with their parents. So that, again, is to make people not feel alone, that all parents, or many parents, go through challenging periods with their children, but there's a range, of course, of what they're dealing with. So it's supporting the parents to swim against the tide of polarization, because the tide is saying, if you don't clamp down on this child, you are a bad parent, you're a bad example to the community. So it's supporting those parents to swim against that tide. Thank you. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Okay, now I want to move to some of the other questions and other panel members. There's a question on boys and working with boys. Again, I think some of our partners could perhaps talk to that. Vanan?
I was a question not just boys and also parents. And in Vietnam, I think it's quite useful to have parents to get clearly with the messages regarding child rights, the value of girls' education, and the consequences of the child marriage. But the more importantly is the way to forward these messages to parents and boys. So far, we mostly use the through community meetings. It's not very fun. So I think to try to select good messages with the appropriate mediums is very important. For example, community dramas. They love dramas. So I think such a way will help. But not only communication. We see that in Hmong community, we also have a kind of fine, and they are shame of fine. For example, if parents do not keep their children in school, they will be fined. And not all the time is implemented, the fine. But just the fact that you are not keeping your child in school, you will be fined. That makes them ashamed. And it's also work. So I think it's one of the way. So if you see the situation in Vietnam, especially in Hmong community, all parents, especially mothers, are illiterate. But now almost all girls completed 9th grade, so lower secondary school. So it makes difference. It's a very big difference. So all these work together. Communication messages, fine, but also improving livelihood and some employment, off-farm employment opportunity for girls and women. Yes.
Thank you, Vanan. Sarah and Rachel, there was a question around global goals and gender norms. I don't know if either of you, Rachel, yeah?
So I think it was hopes and fears, was it, about global goals? Well, I think, overall we're in a very good place. We've got a strong set of goals on gender equality. We've got a standalone goal 5, and it's also well mainstreamed in the other goals. But what are the challenges? I mean, I guess some of the challenges are that because we have a lot of goals, many more than the MDGs, that countries may cherry pick, areas where it's easier to demonstrate progress. And it's possible that some of the more challenging ones around FGM and CFM, child marriage, are seen to be more contentious and are not the ones that are picked. The other challenge I see is that in terms of national systems to collect data around this sort of new range, the indicators that will go with the goals, there's a massive investment that's done. We already know that many countries don't collect data on the existing MDGs. So with a longer list of issues on more difficult areas, whether it's violence against women and girls or child marriage and FGM, it is going to require a lot to support those systems. But I think on child marriage we're in a good place because, there are indicators in place already collected through the the MIX and DHS systems. So we've got something that we can build on. And I'm really hoping, because DFID, the Netherlands, Canada and others are working on a new global programme on child marriage, which hopefully will support some of the national systems, both to develop national plans in relation to child marriage, develop targets, but also develop systems that they can sort of track changes and look at what's working over the shorter and longer term. So I think I'm pretty hopeful overall, but it is going to require a massive sort of step change in our efforts.
Sarah, do you want to make some...
I agree entirely on the challenge and the concern that if we do end up trying to track, to think about all of these goals as separate, we're going to have a lot of these difficulties. The potential is that, we now have, in addition to the essentially social goals, these other goals, and these are all integrated. And I think, the focus on these kind of issues around gender, girls' education, child marriage, the things that then lead to better outcomes in other domains. Essentially, if we get this particular set of issues right, they have a huge impact across, our other social goals, but also then we need to link it, and we've been saying, the intersections. If you get girls staying in school, delaying marriage, having healthier children, if you also give them labour market opportunities, that feeds into all your economic goals, your more inclusive development goals, your economic growth goals. And similarly, if you can move on some of these engaging around community, schools, children, adolescents, in terms of information education, what does that mean for changing behaviour, for channels for information about environmental sustainability, all these other goals we're trying to achieve. So in a sense, I think this is such a critical entry point. If we can really think about, and I think it's probably more broadly the second decade of children's lives, boys and girls, getting that right, I think we have a huge opportunity to shift and really get to the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals rather than just focusing on indicators and things. So I think it's, whether we can realize it, I don't know, but I think this is an entry point that's very powerful.
Anita, do you want to say anything about the parents or the boys' involvement?
Research or as a whole? I think, yes, also as the other country partners have said, one of the main messages was that, we have empowered girls now to some extent, we have changed their aspirations, we have given them exposure, but they are still in the same structure, they are still within the same norms. So, and there are, certain powerful, agents within the community and also in the family that have a tendency to either, give them a chance to become more, have more capabilities, or restrict the kind of opportunities that we are giving to them. So definitely, from all our research, it came out that parents, and especially fathers, the male members of the community, are very important to to include when we think of any kind of interventions for the girls.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take another round of questions. Okay, we've got 2 here, and 3 over here, and 1 here. So should we start over here? Please say who you are again.
Yeah, I'm Nikki van der Gaag. I'm an independent gender consultant, work with Sharon on the Girls Report, and also do work with Instituto Pro Mundo that does a lot of work with boys and men, and with Young Lives, which is also starting to, it's a research program, also starting to look at gender in a more serious and systematic way. And I really welcome ODI's work on structural norms, because it seems to me so important, not just to focus on individual girls, but to look at the structures around them. I wanted to pick up on Sarah's point, actually, about the continuum, because I think, although obviously it's really important to look at that transition into early adolescence, but it's also important to recognise that a lot of these norms start very, very young. So there are some really interesting programs around the world working with boys and with girls at a much younger age, but I think there are not enough of them and they haven't been evaluated. At the same time, at the other end of the continuum, where young people are getting into work, there's a huge issue, of course, around the kind of economic situation in which they find themselves. So not only girls not being able to find work, but boys not being able to find work and experiencing the shame of feeling that they can't fulfill their roles, which can lead to violence and other things. So I guess my point is really, and my question is really about that continuum from social norms starting very, very young, right up to what happens when boys and girls go into work. Thank you.
Question here.
Hi, Suzanne Petroni with the International Center for Research on Women. First, a quick thank you to Dr. Zaza for introducing me to a new term. We don't have that term in America, sit on the naughty step. I like that. So remember that one. And thank you, Rachel, for entrusting ICRW and ODI with the Global Girls Research Initiative. But a bigger thanks to DFID for investing in that program, because it does one of the things that you cited as a challenge, it tackles that in terms of addressing girls as holistic human beings. Instead of looking at girls in the silos of child marriage or FGM or family planning or violence, it actually looks at the whole girl as looking at the challenges that she faces. So my question for you is, do you have any advice for other donors, or for those of us who are trying to convince other donors of the need to break out of silos and look at adolescent girls in the complexity of the lives that they are dealing with?
Thank you.
Easy one, right?
Okay, questions over here? 2 just here, and then we'll take this 2 more, I think, on the other side.
We've heard examples of extreme cases of violence in the UK, and I know that there are other cases of extreme violence in the countries we've heard from. I was just wondering, how can these extreme cases be tackled? We've heard from the Girls Club in Vietnam, which is a great initiative, but how can this tackle extreme violence? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Amanda Barnes from Oxford Global Media. I wanted to ask the panel, given the sort of increasing pace of urbanisation, have anybody found any evidence of social norms taking a different trajectory in a sort of urbanised setting than in a rural setting?
Thank you. I think there's 2 more, or at least 1 more over here.
Hi, my name is Christina. I've just finished an internship in Ghana with the UN Refugees Agency. So I did some work on sexual violence in those communities, and I guess my question comes directly from that, actually linked to not just urban and rural, but generally the communities being more mixed ethnicity versus maybe quite isolated communities, and whether the strategies and messaging that you went with was different because of that, and whether the mixture of ethnicities provide an opportunity in terms of perhaps one being maybe more progressive in terms of women's rights than others, or whether actually that was more of a challenge because communities maybe in that setting might get more defensive about protecting their own culture and their own identity. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a question here.
Hi, I'm Claire Hughes. I'm from ITAD. I just wanted to pick up on a point that Rachel actually raised about the bundling of interventions for girls' empowerment, tackling social norms. And ITA is actually part of a consortium implementing a DFID program, which is seeking to create a more supportive, enabling environment for empowering girls and adopting a social norms approach. And this is in Nigeria. It's called Voices for Change. And we've adopted a multi-layered and multifaceted approach. So we're working on legislation, we're working at the community level, we're also building skills of girls. We look at the environment that the girls live within and work with the boys and men who they socialize with, engage with. We work with their influentials in their communities and use communications tools for doing that. So it's a very rounded approach. And I was just interested from the work that the panel has been involved in, to what extent you've seen those kinds of holistic approaches, and to what extent, if you have, to what extent you feel they make a significant difference, or if you haven't, is that a significant blockage? And just trying to get at what are the critical elements for creating tipping points for change and real gender empowerment.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to start with this first one on the continuum, the norms starting young but also going through to the older age, and ask first over here if anybody wants to comment on that.
Yeah, the difficulty of reaching parents. I know in the schools, for example, we can have the girls and educate the girls on on various issues, be it biological developments, physical changes and so on, and the other threats around the girls. But there are. This alone does not work unless we work with parents as well. And so there are now in some initiatives in Ethiopia. Some, as I talked this morning, where approaches are, made by disaggregating or segmenting by age, like the younger adolescents, the older adolescents, and then right away to the older people. So addressing concerns for each individual parents, and that way you can solve the problems. It's it's something that is happening now, and we feel that this is work well.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions here. Zaza, do you want to answer any of these questions? Do you want to touch on any?
Okay, so I guess I could talk about the entry points and how old and teaching both genders. So in terms of the violence against girls and women, what I have found to be helpful is from age 4. So we teach reception age girls. We go in, we do assemblies. So it's not this is a lesson about violence against girls and women, but it will be, so for instance, we had a whole stream of sessions, assemblies around International Day of the Girl just recently. and International Day of Women's Day, we also go into school. So the aspects that we'll be speaking about are bullying, and about how that can translate into violence against girls and women. So, for instance, the idea that some parents will say, well, wanted my child to go to a single-sex school, but you know what girls' schools can be like, all girls' schools, they can be really catty and quite difficult terrain to negotiate. And it's challenging, well, why should we accept that as a norm? Why should we say, well, you know what girls' schools can be like? That is not acceptable. That is violence against girls by girls. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a hideous, what turned out to be a riot within East London, Walthamstow, that was two girls fighting over a boy. And look what happened there. There were girls with baseball bats, kicking, punching, etc., etc. So it's really for us, all of us in the room, to try to relook at what is and who is the perpetrators. So, for instance, when I talk about violence against girls, I also talk about forced first-time sex. Now, forced, again, looking at what is force. Is it oh, come on, why don't you? That, to me, is forced as much as somebody being pinned down. So it's looking at that again and making it cool to say no. And FGM, just finally, that again, looking at who is it who is pushing for the FGM. And my experience is that it's often the matriarch. It's not the father or the uncle or the grandfather. It's often the female members of the family. So that I have personal experience in, and also that girls themselves get caught up in the frenzy, the excitement of the culture, whether it's FGM or child marriage even, that, all my friends are getting married, I'm the odd one out, the fact that I'm 12 is that, I could be left on the shelf. I myself at 15 wanted to get married and my family wouldn't allow it. So I can speak from a place of being caught up in that culture and wanting that. And the FGM, I was so appalled that my mother wouldn't allow me to be circumcised because everybody in my class was being circumcised and I was the one who was denied that rite of passage. So it's really the rethinking, the checking out when we use these terms, whether it's honor-based violence, or forced marriage or rape, is coercion part of rape as well, where you're just enticing, using the pressure on somebody. So just inviting you to do that and to start from age 4. Obviously using appropriate terminology, but to encourage really young children, girls and boys, to think about what they are doing and what others around them are doing to others.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to allow us to run only about 5 minutes over, so that we can answer a few more of these questions. There was a question on urbanisation. I wondered, and different sort of social norm trajectories. I don't know, Grace, in the Uganda context, if you want to make a comment on that.
Yes, the question of rapid urbanization, yes, in Uganda it's taking place in the rural areas, and it's one of those drivers that has been mentioned by the parents and as one that is driving some of these social norms, and that is also creating changes in the marriage forms. To as we mentioned, the more the girls are able now to pick their own partners, but more in an informal way, and cohabit, unlike before where the parents were involved in negotiating. So they are devaluing even the processes of bride wealth, But I also wanted to comment on the other point of the continuum. 2 of the projects we assessed had the model of the ecological model, which looks at the individual and the household and the community, but along the life course continuum. And I think it was that made it possible for them to design interventions and programs that suited the different groups at different ages. For instance, if I give example, the young, very, very young girls and boys had, charts and the small play tools and so on to demonstrate, to discuss gender issues, up to the adults where we had like the fireplace, even fireplace talks and conversations, community dialogues, and then across the board we also they would have radio talks in order to address the different needs at different stages, and targeting also not only those in school, but they also had clubs out of school, and those and the in school. And to bundle up with the other question of whether it works, I think the two projects we looked at, the combination of the different approaches for the different groups seemed to make a difference. For instance, when girls were, skills were built and they're empowered, they're stronger in their agency, giving them the skills to make the sanitary towels helped them then, meet the need that would otherwise may have affected their attendance in school. And these small clubs where they make small crafts gives them, the opportunity to earn little income that possibly the men would lure them, buy them a soda and maybe a chapati. I don't know if you know the chapatis, but some form of bread, which keeps them in school. So we thought those programs were, made a difference by tackling multiple needs of these girls.
Great, thank you very much, Grace. I think that also answers some of the other questions about a more holistic approach. Anita, do you want to just make a couple of comments?
Yeah, I think regarding on the continuum, it has been very interesting. So in Nepal, we found that social norms play at different levels. So for the young adolescent, it's less, it's more flexible. But as soon as you turn into an older adolescent, which is like as you are, into your 16, 17 years of age, I mean, our key respondents, but also the girls and the situation that we observed found that they are in a more, they are more policed against these social norms. They have to abide by a lot of other expectations that this community have around them, and the teachers were very able to tell us very clearly what was happening. So as long as the girl is in class 5, 6, is very interactive also with the teachers but also with her peers. But as soon as they reach class 8, for example, when they are older adolescent, all this interaction stops. So which means that they are now very much forced by these kind of social structures to abide to these rules. And we definitely engage with boys in all the 3 years of our research. We are mostly talking to the adolescent brothers of the adolescent girls, their fathers. And yes, boys do, social norms equally affect the boys. For example, the same norm that makes a girl to marry early also affects the boys, because it is a boy that she is marrying. And then the boy, he is responsible to take care of the girl, whom he has married, which means that he ends up dropping out of education to go looking for jobs. So, of course, it has an impact on different age groups in different ways, but also on both sides of the gender. So,
thank you. Vanan, did you want to make a comment at all in our final panel?
I would like to share a bit about the urbanization, but mostly in Vietnam and in Hmong community that we work with. It is with modernization and how it impacts on not just norms but also practice. So compared to the parents who mostly are victims of arranged marriage, boys and girls now are by themselves make a decision, but mostly boys, but not girls. And parents now accept that arranged marriage is not normal. And parents are quite happy with the decision of their boy to bring home a bride. But the problem is not just because of the will, but also, for example, now children have much more access to TV with sexually and image, which also affect them. And in the context that pre-marriage sex is strictly forbidden, so it also lead to early marriage. And also now, if parents cannot have the mobile phone, so now almost every child at 15 have mobile phone and they text each other. So that means in some of our cases, children are married earlier than their parents. So we see a different impact of modernization also.
I'm going to move to our two discussants to also have some final words briefly. I've just got one other question which came in from Marine, who worked with adolescent girls in Lebanon and wanted to know the extent to which some of these issues could be transferred to emergency settings. So I thought maybe Rachel could tackle that one, along with any of the others that, but if you could do it in about 2 minutes, that would be great.
Okay, I'll speak quickly. So I think on the issue of working outside silos, I have to be very clear that I think the recognition of the need to work beyond silos and take a girl-centred approach, there's one thing recognising it, one thing is actually effectively implementing it in the programme. And I think Sarah will admit from the policy implementation review of the strategic vision that I think there is a tendency still for DFID and other bilateral agencies to be working across a number of critical areas, but not necessarily building on the synergies. So I think we're taking some of these messages on board, and as Grace mentioned, this opportunity to look across the life course and think about what are the critical transitions, whether it's early childhood or whether it's adolescence, and then think about what that sort of critical set of interventions is. So we've been developing some thinking, we've been getting sort of the gender, health and education folks to work together about what these things are, getting some sort of narrative. But of course, when you say this to country offices, we think this is what you should do, is the sort of, well, yes, that's all very good in theory, but how do we do it? Because, you know, the development architecture is set around often sector ministries. I think often the people who do the best holistic initiatives are civil society, but then the challenges then of sustainability and scale. So I think there is a sort of trade-off there that we can learn some of the lessons, but maybe the holistic initiatives don't address every last area, but it's looking at bundling 2 or 3 things together as opposed to just having one thing. So I think we have to be realistic about how far you can bundle and go to scale at the same time. And then secondly, on the issue about humanitarian emergencies, I think there are, as far as I can say, I think there's a lot more potential, particularly around Middle East, North Africa, to look at women and girls challenging harmful norms, but you may not start off with a harmful norms programme or a child marriage programme, but actually look at it within a broader protection lens. And I think we've got to get smarter in the way we do that.
Thank you. Sarah, 1 minute.
Okay, very briefly. I mean, I think a lot's been said on, and I agree that these are very complex issues, and there's everything is connected. This continuing the life course, the complexity, but also the social processes and the economic processes are happening. Processes of urbanization, processes, an economic crisis, a disaster, an emergency shifts things quite dramatically for those communities. So I think we also have to be very humble about, our interventions are not going to change social processes in major ways. They're going to intervene to maybe ameliorate some of the worst practices or shift things, the trajectory a little bit. But we have to recognize that what we're doing and where we're intervening is only a tiny part, however holistic, however complex, etc. And that, I think their researchers and people on the ground have to be maybe also, ourselves humble and understand from those communities. And I think this is what you're trying to do, but then really recognizing these processes of social change are happening. And usually by the time we understand what's going on, it's moved ahead and it's ahead of us. And so we're always going to be running to catch up. And I think, maybe that's not the most optimistic note in terms of, but it is the realism of understanding and being, standing back outside these processes of social change and trying to really understand what is happening holistically, not focusing. We have to work on our interventions, but we need to see the bigger picture.
Thank you. Before we finish, there are a few things I want to say. Our researchers have uncovered some fascinating accounts of social change processes in different countries. And we have a lot of these materials out for you to look at. There's a wonderful story which we have from Nepal of a girl who is being constantly harassed, sexually harassed, just on the school bus, etc., etc. And she goes to a girls' club, and one day, I mean, this has been going on for a very long while, she's just had enough, and the boy sits next to her, tries to touch her, and she slaps him across the face. And I feel, for me at that moment, I think, oh my goodness, you know, what's going to happen? She must be thinking, what is going to happen? And actually, he slaps her back. And at that moment, the people in the bus stand up, and they grab this boy, and they take him off the bus, and they take him to the police station, and he has to go and apologize to her. And she couldn't have known that that was going to happen. She didn't know if the adults were going to support her. But it's very illustrative of the fact that change does happen, and that we're looking also at trying to empower girls at the same time as other changes are happening with parents and with adults. And I think it sums up very nicely some of the change processes that we've been seeing in lots of ways. Before I close, I just want to also, we've got a networking lunch. We have 4 other researchers, 5, if you could just stand up at the back there, who weren't on our panel, and Carol as well. These are also researchers from our country, so please do, at the networking lunch, please speak to them and to all of our panel. I want to thank our panel very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming and for engaging. We have a Resource to Action resource series, which has pulled together all of our work and our learning. We have all our country reports and our country policy notes. In room E, just here, we'll be having an online demonstration of the resource series, and some of the materials are printed out, but you can access them online. This is the link to that online resource series. I would also say at the moment, if you are trying to look for our work, we've had a few problems with our website, so do also use Google. And just our names and Google, and a lot of the resources will come up if you can't get them through our website. At the moment, we're hoping to correct that. But this will take you also directly to our online series. And I think that ends it. Session. Thank you very much. We have a networking lunch, so please do come, and please show your appreciation in the usual way.